Я очень рад, что вы пришли послушать известного ученого, который вам презентует доклад, подготовленный Нью-Йоркской академией наук. Это очень современный документ. Так получилось, что благодаря дружбе Андрея Вениаминовича и нашего американского коллеги мы получили его за 2 недели до Ярославского форума. И я в том числе отдал... Да, и я отдал начальнику референтуры президента, поэтому, когда наши американские друзья приехали, мы не только прочитали, мы уже знали, о чем они будут говорить, но 700 экземпляров, которые были распространены этого доклада, это только верхняя часть айсберга. Я думаю, что уже несколько тысяч экземпляров этого доклада знаю, уже известны, ими пользуются. Я вам всячески его рекомендую, потому что это, на мой взгляд, очень интересный документ. Вы знаете, что сейчас публикуется масса всяких документов, посвященных модернизации. Я почему об этом так говорю, это не просто вежливое предисловие. Дело в том, что я не просто написал, я уже цитирую и ссылаюсь на этот доклад. Я действительно его прочитал и серьезно, глубоко прочитал. Так вот, среди многих документов, которые посвящены этой теме, к сожалению, большинство абсолютно пустых, публицистических, где мало что полезного можно подчеркнуть. Очень много вредных и очень мало качественных, полезных документов. Поэтому вот мы пригласили нашего американского коллегу сюда, потому что он представляет собой не просто один из документов, а один из добротных, полезных документов, который, безусловно, вам нужно пригодиться для понимания вообще сути проблемы. Тем более, что в докладе сделан очень интересный экскурс. Там проводится анализ нескольких стран. И там, кстати, развеиваются мифы, которые у нас 20 лет бытуют в нашей стране. Ну, например, миф такой, что ВПК разрушил экономику. Вот в этом докладе показывается, что инновационная экономика Израиля базируется на ВПК. И больше того, второй миф о том, что внешняя угроза уничтожает возможности для развития. Это тоже миф, потому что как раз благодаря внешней угрозе не только Израиль, но и Соединенные Штаты создали высокотехнологичные отрасли и инструменты. То есть, понимаете, это доклад, который мог бы написать лидер российской какой-нибудь оппозиции. Вот. Но в данном случае не заподозришь американских известных ученых как бы в симпатиях к этому, поэтому их взгляд очень трезвый. Очень интересно разделы, посвященные роли государства. У нас, например, существует миф, свидетелем которого мы все являемся, 20 лет опять же существует, который нам навязывают, о том, что наука должна самофинансироваться, да, или коммерциализироваться. Вы об этом слышали не раз. Это глупость. Медведев сказал, когда побывал в Калифорнии, первый раз о том, что более 50% исследований и разработок финансируется в США государством. Вот в докладе, кстати, показывается, что и там вывод, кстати, рекомендации для России, вот там есть перечень совершенно конкретных рекомендаций, и как раз рекомендации задействовать институты государства в финансировании науки, в развитии инноваций. И так далее, и тому подобное. Мой вам совет, он переведен, кстати, на русский язык, вот, он очень полезный, очень интересный. Там несложные методики. Вот этого свод методика, она, в общем, достаточно известна, она, по-моему, лет 30 уже, да, существует. И как бы вы посмотрите на эту простую матрицу, и вам многие вещи будут понятно. Поэтому я с удовольствием предоставляю слово нашему американскому коллеге и очень рад, что у нас есть возможность познакомить вас вживую с автором такого замечательного доклада. Спасибо вам.
I will speak in English. I can understand you if you want to ask me questions in Russian, but by agreement with Professor Korotkov, I will give this presentation in English. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity and for that very gracious introduction. That was very nice. I appreciate that very much because a lot of work went into preparation of this report. And I'm very happy to see that it's causing discussion here in Russia, which is its purpose. So, to begin with, my name is Daniel Satinsky. I am a partner in a consulting group called the Russia Innovation Collaborative. Two of my colleagues are here in the audience, Christopher King and Cynthia Butho. Raise your hand. I participated in this study with the New York Academy of Sciences as one of the co-authors. I was part of the team that the New York Academy of Sciences brought together to put this report in place. As you can see, I just want to review that it was done by the New York Academy of Sciences. At some point, you should take a look at their website to see who they are. They're one of the largest scientific organizations in the world. They are 25,000 members, including some Russians. And the report was prepared for presentation at the Global Policy Forum in Yaroslawl, which was just concluded last week. We printed, aside from whatever copies were printed from the internet before the conference, we printed 750 in Russian and English, and all of them disappeared. These are my only 2 remaining personal copies. You can't have them. I'm just getting to show them that they exist. I guess in the modern age, the PDFs are probably more important than the printed versions, but so I urge you to take a look at the report. In terms of the methodology of the report, it was a combination of research and interviews of experts from around the world. You will see when you look at this, there were at the report that there were a whole panel of experts who were interviewed about innovation policy in general. And the purpose was to, you'll have to excuse me here, I'm manipulating the, what's next? What's it? Just hit enter. Great. Okay. So
he's not a professor.
No, I'm not a professor. I'm not a professor. So the goal of the report was to summarize best practices from 5 different countries, and then to summarize what the current state of the innovation environment in Russia is, and then at the end to draw some conclusions, to try to take the best experience from around the world and apply it to Russia. So when you look at the report, you'll see that there are chapters that cover Israel, India, Taiwan, I'm blanking on the US, and Finland, right. And then there's a chapter on Russia. Those chapters summarize how those innovation ecosystems were built, what policies those countries followed, and with the idea of looking at not only what worked, but what didn't work. I also want to say, because I know that Russians are very sensitive to foreigners lecturing Russia about what you're supposed to do. That was not and never was the intention of the report. It is not to lecture anyone. It is to say, this is what's been done in the world, you should know about it, and you decide, based on scientific understanding of what other countries have done, what will work best for Russia. And the name of the report is Yaroslawl Roadmap because it was presented in Yaroslawl, and 10, 15, 20 because the intention is to emphasize it probably will take 10 years to implement, and Russia has a planning horizon to 2020. There are 15 recommendations of steps to take on this roadmap, and 20 pitfalls to avoid. I'm not going to read all of them. That's what the report is for. You can read them when you look at it and pull it off the internet. What I am going to talk about are some general conclusions and some particular points that I want to emphasize. These are the general conclusions I wanted to emphasize with you today. As in the introduction, I know there's a debate about what's the role of government in innovation? In every single case, the government has played a critical role in creating an innovation environment, and particularly at the first stages. There is a mythology that is present in the world and in our Silicon Valley, our famous Silicon Valley, that the government had nothing to do with the creation of the innovation environment in Silicon Valley. It was only heroic individuals working in their garages. Absolutely not true. The demand for innovation was sparked by government contracts. The creation of the venture capital industry was also fostered by government programs. At a certain point, these institutions became independent of that in a certain sense, but still, it's important to understand that this is true in every single country we looked at. The second thing was that there is no one single path to build an innovation economy, but all of them are based on having strong science and having enough entrepreneurs. And, oh great, we're making lots of technical progress here as we speak. Innovation, there it is. And also integration in world markets. So you'll see these things when you read the report. The next point is that constructing an innovation economy is a process that takes a long time. It is not a single event. You're never done. It's not finished. You start on this path, innovation becomes integrated in your society, and you're continually growing and changing. And lastly, a point that I want to come back to, I think and I think probably this is important for Russia, is that innovation policies are set more or less by government at a national level, but not every region of the country, of any country, develops evenly. There are innovation ecosystems that develop locally. And some places they don't develop as well as they do other places. And we can come back to that part of the discussion later. The important thing for me to say, and I participated in these discussions in the Yaroslавl Forum, this was a point which was clear to me from listening to the discussions, is there's a lot of confusion between what is modernization and what is innovation. And they aren't the same thing in our understanding, in the way we constructed this report, and our understanding of what we were trying to get at. Modernization is using the most up-to-date ways of technology or of management. So modernization, say in the case of Russia, might be an auto plant purchasing a production line from Germany or the US that's nearly state-of-the-art, but it modernizes what was a Soviet production line. So it's modernization, but it is not innovation. Innovation, in our understanding, is doing things new and different, and often are disruptive technologies. So the DVD replaces the cassette tape, and the cassette tape disappears. But the DVD was an innovation. It was something new. The telephone, the automobile, these are innovative things which disrupt productive processes. And also what we observe is that innovation is usually initiated by small groups of people or individuals. It doesn't come from large institutions or large companies. Large companies, if you purchase innovation, but they don't usually create it. They have a very hard time creating it. And I think if you think about your own economy, you'll see the implication of that. And I think we can talk about that a little bit more later on. So when we say innovation and an innovation ecosystem, this is one of the few graphical presentations in my report, but an ecosystem is an interrelated set of institutions that foster innovation, that support innovation. And all of these, in a perfect innovation system need to be present. They're based on academic excellence and scientific achievement. But that academic achievement alone can't create new products. And when we say innovation, we're talking about creating new products and new processes. So government policy can support academic excellence, tech transfer, and I know that there are now tech transfer offices in many of the Russian, or if not all, of Russian research institutions and universities, but these are the bridge to commercialization of innovation. You need experienced entrepreneurs, and I'll talk about that again in a moment, to take that intellectual property and turn it into a project and a business. And you need sectors of the economy who pull that, who create the demand for it, who look for innovation and incorporate it in the productive processes. And we'll talk a little bit later again about this, what I have here is public seed funding, grants and loans, the so-called valley of death for entrepreneurs, which I'll repeat a little bit later, which is how do you survive in the period before anybody will invest in you and transform your great idea into a company. You need financing to get past that period, which we refer to as the valley of death. And venture capital is the next round of funding. And the venture capital industry in Russia is very weak. It exists to a certain extent. There are private equity funds. There is money here, but as yet not a well-formed venture capital industry. So when we looked at Russia, I think it's just to state the obvious, that Russia has very strong intellectual resources in basic science and mathematics, some of the best in the world. Russia has sector strengths in space, atomic energy, and production of weapons, world leaders in some of these sectors that are basically science-based. But if you look at the results, there are very little spin-offs from this, very little that penetrates into the rest of the economy from the leadership in these sectors. We could discuss that, but it seems to us to be a fact, and an interesting one. When we looked at the current state of the innovation system in Russia, we can say that some of the pieces of that ecosystem that I just showed you have been put in place. You probably all know many of those, but they're all pretty recent, and they're all searching for their niche. They're searching for their own relationships with each other, and how this becomes a system and not just a set of institutions. So as a result, and we looked at Russia, and if you talk to investors, you'll see that they often repeat the statement that there are no projects to invest in Russia. I don't know, I'm not sure if any of you have heard that said, but people often will say, there's no projects in Russia. My colleagues and I went out to a business competition in Novosibirsk. It was a boot camp for the Academ Park, the tech park in Novosibirsk. We heard presentations from probably 20 young entrepreneurs, 5-minute pitches in English, and met with 15 to 20 companies. I can tell you there are projects in Russia. There are entrepreneurs in Russia. They're there, but they're at a level at which investors don't recognize them because of these gaps and because of this valley of death problem. So when you look at Russia as an innovation environment, it's not a negative picture, it's an incomplete picture. It is a picture of a country making a transition, but a transition that needs to be accelerated based on some of these gaps in the innovation system and the lack of maturity of certain sections of it, particularly in finance. So what does it mean to say there's a valley of death? I really want to get this sort of concept. I don't know, maybe some of you are already entrepreneurs. I have no idea, or have this experience. But if you are a young scientist and you come up with a great idea, I'll give you an example, a non-Russian idea. I rode the train from Moscow to Yaroslавl with an entrepreneur from Australia. So they do 3D technology. They make chips that go into Samsung TVs so that you can see 3D on a TV. So this was basically a mathematical problem about how to take regular 2D content and transform it into 3D. So the company started with some idea of what they were doing, and it took them 9 years to perfect this product, because having a good idea and even being able to demonstrate it on paper is not a company and it's not a product. And there is a process that companies have to go through to test their ideas, to find out what works and what doesn't, to transform it into a product, and understand the market into which they're trying to sell. And this is a long project, a long process. And the proof of concept is sort of an accepted part of the entrepreneurial process. In this company's case, they were located in a tech park in Australia, so that they had some resources provided to them. They had the infrastructure that they needed, they had a place to work. They received grants from the government, they received tax credits, and they were able to find individual investors who believed in their technology to finance them over this 9-year period, this so-called Valley of Death. This process is not yet very well developed in Russia, and it is critical to the innovation process, to the creation of new, young, healthy companies. And we usually have this saying in the U.S. that your first round of funding comes from the family, friends, and fools. Somebody you convince that so your family will do it because, all right, okay, it's you, I'll give you some money. And friends will say, okay, it's you, I'll give you some money. And fools will have some idea that, wow, this is something that's going to make me a fortune. So yes, I'll put some money in it. And so that works for a certain stage, but usually you don't get very much money. And in our system, the next stage of funding usually comes from what we call angel investors, who are wealthy individuals who now have decided that they want to make more money from their wealth. But usually, in our case, they're successful entrepreneurs. And then the next step up is venture capitalists. Now, it would be a mistake to think of these funding sources simply as funding sources, because in our case, what these angel investors are people who are experienced in business. And so they will be the ones who will teach this young entrepreneur, well, have you looked at the market? Do you understand the market? Do you understand how to do a business plan? They will work with them through this process, and as mentors, help them achieve what they need to achieve. When they get to the next stage, venture capitalists are not simply people who invest. They take an active role in the company. They help find contacts. They help find markets. They help find suppliers. They help find other financiers. But they're experienced business people. And it's exactly in these areas that we find weakness in Russia at this point. There's lots of money in Russia. Clearly, lots of money in Russia. But the people who made that money did it under conditions which are quite different than the conditions we're talking about in building an innovation economy. So if you made your money in trading or insurance or some other way, you don't have much to say to a young entrepreneur about how to build a modern business that's integrated in the world economy. So it's a problem for Russia that it needs to solve in terms of bridging the gap between its innovative potential and formation of new companies. Along with that, you need knowledgeable support. So you need to know that, well, if I have a great idea, how am I going to protect it? I'm going to protect my intellectual property. Russia's system of that is not well developed. Of course, Russia does adhere to most of the international patents, but an understanding of that patent process is not strong. And as I spoke with some patent lawyers before I came here, part of the problem is if you want a patent, you have to come to the office in Moscow. You physically have to come to the office in Moscow, and that as a result, all the expertise is concentrated in Moscow. But if you look at a place like Akademgorodok, there's a lot of people there who have things that should be patented, but there's not enough expertise at the local level to make that happen. So there's work that needs to be done around that kind of support. And marketing specialists, people who not only are PR, but marketing in a real, more in-depth sense, who understand that you've got to look at a demand for a product. You can have a great idea about something that's really very cool. If there's no demand, no product, you're wasting your time. And you need to be able to, and sometimes the product, the use for your intellectual property that you think of is not the use that it's going to be used for. I'm not sure, we saw an example of that we saw at MIT where someone had some kind of, it was a laser technology, right? The hearing thing, right? It was a laser technology, and it was able to image complex three-dimensional shapes. Great technology. The person who invented it really didn't know what to do with it, how to turn that into a product. They worked with this commercialization center, this proof of concept center at MIT, and they figured out that, well, they could use this technology to map an ear, the inner part of the ear, and make hearing aids that fit exactly in a person's ear. Now, the person who invented it never would have thought of that, but it is because there's a support system that turns these great ideas into products, and there's a system that supports it, that these innovations can become products and companies. And there needs to be a community of people. You know, one of the difficulties that we see is lack of trust. Many entrepreneurs, they don't trust the lawyers, and they don't trust other entrepreneurs, and they're afraid that people are going to steal their ideas, and there's not this kind of cooperation. And it's a cultural problem. I don't know how to solve it, but I know that it needs to be solved for the benefit of this community, that this sort of cross-fertilization of ideas and cooperation will produce a much more profound and successful set of new companies. So, again, my conclusion that is that many of these things are lacking or in short supply. It's critical to understand that innovation ecosystem are a set of relationships. It's not, you can have Rusnano, you can have Russia Venture Fund, you can have tech parks, you can have incubators, you can have all those things. They won't work. They alone are not enough. You need the relationships between entrepreneurs and those institutions, and the proper approach to developing innovation. And I would say it's important that it's critical to functioning of a culture of, to have a culture of entrepreneurship. By that I mean it has to be valued. People have to want to be entrepreneurs, and those people who are entrepreneurs need to be looked upon as important. I mean, again, you all know better than me, but for many of the brightest people in Russia, it's easier to go work for a bank or an oil company than to become an entrepreneur. It's a big risk. And if you fail, failure is not well accepted. I mean, but in fact, failure is part of the entrepreneurial process. When venture capital companies invest in new companies, they invest in 10 and expect 9 to fail, because that's the way it works. And you can't be an entrepreneur without having failed, at least once. I don't know how that works in your country, but it's something that needs to be thought about in terms of supporting innovation, if that's what you want, in innovation to grow in the economy. And there are people who are successful, and who are successful not because they had connections, but because they worked hard. And they exist. Some of them kind of don't want to be in the limelight, but I think some of them probably would be just as happy to be known for their hard work and success, but I think they're little known and little recognized. So I've hoped I've kept you awake a little bit, and I want to make just come to my summary about this. And you know, we have a 130-page report. It is very specific. When you read it, you'll come to the end and you'll see, for instance, that the conclusions have been reformulated in terms of President Medvedev's 4I program, very specifically, very concrete. I want you to read them. I want you to think about them, but I can't put every single thing here on the board. So these are a few things that I just want to emphasize with you. That if Russia wants to diversify its economy and promote innovation, there has to be a long-term commitment. It is not something that can be done quickly or overnight. And that commitment has to be one that the society accepts as well and participates in. Rusnano just did a study which we got part of, which showed the length of time it took for various countries to build a recognized innovation economy. And those numbers varied from 10 to 25 years. And if we look, as I said, that many of these institutions in Russia are relatively young, so you see it's a long period of time. And in politics, you don't have usually a long period of time. People want to say, well, what did you do for me? What was the result? So there needs to be a fundamental understanding in society that this is not only a transition that needs to be made, but that's one worth being made, and one whose results will take a while to show. Secondly, I think it's obvious that Russia needs to continue to support basic science and education. That's budget support, that's universities, that's being creative with their administration and their funding. There are suggestions for that in our report, and I urge you to take a look at them. It's important to think about innovation as integration in both international markets and in domestic markets. The demand for innovation in the Russian domestic market is very low. It's just simply low. And there are reasons for it, and we talk about it, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you very later. So on the one hand, it needs to be promoted. On the other hand, there is an international market for technology. And under the right conditions, Russian scientists and entrepreneurs can become a part of that, and have become a part of it. You have, for instance, a relatively successful software outsourcing industry that has integrated itself within a whole international division of labor using the intellectual resources of Russia. You have software companies who sell into the US and are very popular, although they mostly hide the fact that they're Russian in origin, because for them it's a marketing problem. Then there are other examples. But so when a company gets started, of course you need to identify, well, where is my market going to be, and think about that. But even small companies, under the right conditions, can find their place in an international division of labor. Regional differences. You know, there's a herd mentality when something becomes popular to talk about, then everybody wants to talk about it. So if we're talking about innovation, then everybody wants to be innovative. Every region has to have an innovation plan. Every city has to have some kind of innovation plan. We have the same problem, you know, we also have a problem with our economy and its development. And what you find is almost every city in America or every local government has a tech park or an incubator. And most of them fail because they haven't been thought through very clearly. It's not, you can't just take an automatic answer and apply it locally or regionally. So there are areas of strength in each region. And some of them, and that means that there will be regional developments of places that are much stronger than others. I mean, I think obviously Novosibirsk and Akadem Gorodok is going to be a much better place for innovation than maybe. I won't go there. But even with Skolkovo, it would be a mistake if Skolkovo became the only place of innovation in Russia. It would be a horrible mistake if it was an isolated city of scientists that was the only place where innovation takes place. There are lots of places in Russia that can. It depends on what the regional strengths are, and it will depend on the commitment of local authorities and local business people to build that on those strengths. But the first thing is to identify what your strengths are. What are you good at? And, you know, as a region, and how can you strengthen that? And that's, which is then coming to this valley of death problem. Almost every country we looked at faces this problem in innovation. And every single one of them has programs to support companies to go through that process. They don't pick winners and losers. They don't say, oh, I'm going to have a competition and I'm going to look at 25 technologies. I think that guy is going to be the best one. So we're going to put the money of the government in that guy. They don't do that. But they have agencies that make programs available on a competitive basis to help companies overcome this problem of the valley of death. And Russia needs to do that. Russia needs to have programs which are not picking winners, because we all know where that leads, but are a support for companies, and let the market sort it out, but give them the opportunity to live through that valley of death. And only a government can do that. The private sector hasn't done it, won't do it. They'll continue to say there are no projects in Russia until someone steps in and helps the companies overcome that valley of death problem. And then lastly, the culture of entrepreneurship needs support and development. I'm not going to speculate on how to do that, but it's a task that needs to be done. I want to conclude by saying that, again, whatever I may have sounded like, our intention is not to lecture. It is to say, these are things we've noticed. It's up to you to decide whether you agree with us. The decisions about whether Russia will become an innovative economy or not are the ones going to be made by Russians, clearly, and particularly by people in your generation. Given what I've described, it's going to be your world to create. With that, I'll end my presentation, and I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to hear your opinions, and maybe we'll have time to share some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for a very interesting presentation. Questions? Yeah, please.
Right, I have one question. So you said that investors in Russia, they say they don't have a project to invest in, right? They have problems to find those.
Yeah.
So what is the best way in Russia to find such projects, and on what level is it best to look for such projects to invest in, if they have money to invest?
Well, the problem, let's say part of the problem is that if you're let's assume that you are a venture capitalist. And let's forget for a moment that you don't have any way to get out of the company except to sell it to someone else because there's no IPOs, or very few in technology. You're looking for projects that probably you want to invest anywhere from $3 to $5 million in. And if you're a Rusnano and you've got the legislature looking over your shoulder, then you want 100 million, 500 million. There aren't that many projects of that sort. I think that there will be these projects at a lower level. I mean, let me go back to my experience in Novosibirsk. So we heard the presentations, understood the technology. Not a single one of the people could tell us, okay, well, they may know how much money they need to take the next step, and not a single one thought through, well, if you give me that much money, what am I going to give you? In other words, how do I value my company? Am I going to give you 25% of it to give me $50,000? Or am I going to give you none of my company, but I'll give I want a loan and I'll pay it back at a certain interest, or I'll give you a convertible note that you can later turn into shares. So it's hard for me to answer your question without coming back to the Valley of Death problem. Those companies need assistance to identify what a real business plan would look like, and they don't always need that much money. So they need investors at a much earlier stage, but they can't get them until they get over this problem. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg, if you will. So for instance, in Novosibirsk, I think that the tech park is taking upon themselves to try to help bridge that gap. I think we're going to go from here to the Perm, to the Economic Forum in Perm. We're going to meet with people there at TEDx, which is a sort of idea forum, and young entrepreneurs are going to participate. We're going to go to Intera in Siberia, in Novosibirsk, and there'll be over 1,000 young entrepreneurs there. I think that it's just a matter of doing that hard work at the lower level to find those projects. But other than that, I don't have a good answer for you.
What is the main mistake of the business plans of these young entrepreneurs who you met here in Russia? Probably you can give us some 3 major points.
Okay. I'll do it, and then I'll ask my colleagues to add if they have something. Cindy's going to jump in here. Well, I'll tell you one was, I'll give you an example. Software company that has a relatively successful cloud computing solution has worked here in Russia. They said, we want to enter the U.S. market. Okay. They know nothing about the U.S. market. They could spend a lot of money trying to... We
know about the U.S. market, something probably.
Well, okay, but do you know who their competitors are, and what the level of demand is, and how compatible their technology is with ours?
IBM? IBM?
Okay, but anyway, one of the mistakes people make is not doing enough of that focus on markets. That's a mistake. But this is an existing company. So, and usually what they do is they'll find a Russian classmate or a family member, and they'll say, oh, well, I trust you because, we know each other, we're compatriots, and so I'll let you do this, and I'll give you X number of dollars, and you'll build my company. And that person may or may not know what they're doing. Most of the time they don't. So that's not the way to do it. For the smaller companies, it's really not understanding what steps to take to get to be bigger, what money they need now, how they're going to structure themselves in terms of their share structure and loans and equity, and in order to attract investors. They can't say to as I said to you, they can't say to an investor, if you give me $100,000, I'll give you 10%, 20%, 50%, who knows? Some amount of my company. And not only am I going to give you that money, but I want you to be part of the board of directors, and you're going to help me grow the company, because that's what's going to make us both make money. But they don't do that. They don't think that way because they don't have that business experience, and there aren't people who have gone through that, because what they think is if they give that shares, if they give 26% plus one share as a controlling interest to some investor, that person will steal their company. And that's what they're afraid of. So that's another major. I don't know, do you want to add anything, Cindy?
Yeah, I would just add that after sitting through all of these business plan competitions, not one person, as Dan just said, stated what they're clearly asking for. We had to come back and say, so what are you asking for? What really is your plan? What really is your exit? What are the other participants getting? What are you asking for needs to be said at the beginning, the middle, and the end. It needs to be repeated many times for the person that's evaluating that business plan. I would also say the majority of people focus on the technology solution and not what problem they're solving. The technology solution is actually interesting, probably most interesting to you, the entrepreneur, but to the business investor, what problem you're solving, what's the potential market size for that problem, talking in terms of TAM, total available market. Lots of times you don't know what that looks like, and you have to make estimates about what that total available market is. That's not necessarily comfortable, but you have to do it. You have to say, this is the problem I'm solving, this is the potential market for it, this is the value of the market, and as Dan said, these are my competitors. Never say there's no competitors. There's always a competitor. And understand to be able to talk about that in a sophisticated way. And again, please say what you're asking for. It's just amazing how many business plans do not clearly state that.
Do you have any courses in Britain or in America universities which is probably called How to Create a Startup?
We have a
PowerPoint. We have a PowerPoint right here that we're going to be presenting in Perm. You know, that subject is part of what I described as this innovation ecosystem. I mean, if you were in a place like Boston, you could go to a seminar on that subject probably almost every night of the week, some different aspect of it. A seminar being put on by a marketing agent, lawyers, a trade association. It becomes a sort of training ground, you know, through the common effort. And there are courses, of course. Babson College near Boston is rated as the best school for entrepreneurship in the United States. There are Northeastern, there are various universities that do this kind of work. But many people get it outside of the university through this kind of cooperative environment that's created by people who believe in innovation in this process.
And I, again, would just add, the biggest thing that we talk about with startups is the movement from this. In the olden days, you would start a company, your team would be local, you would get your VC money local, you would penetrate your domestic market, you would then think about international expansion, and you would go for a second or third round of funding, explicitly saying you're going for that round of funding. And then you might think about sales in that international market. And in today's world, what we're seeing with startups is they're born global from day one. They are actually looking at where's the best talent. That might not be in Moscow or Perm or Boston. It might be a combination of those. Where do I get my money? And that can be a combination. Where do I actually sell? It doesn't have to be your domestic market first. So startups today are thinking laterally. They're thinking instantly about being a global organization. That obviously brings some barriers and some obstacles. But I think what we're seeing with the startups that we're working with in Boston, for instance, they actually move from a startup phase to that next sort of a steady state phase much quicker by thinking of being global in the first instance. So, and we can certainly send you some of that material if you're interested.
Excellent. Thank you. Probably we'll put it on the web portal of the university and we'll organize some kind of such special course.
Great. Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Sure, of course.
Thank you very much for the short presentation. Well, you mentioned that any innovation is potentially disruptive. As far as economy is concerned, it means that some people will surely lose their job.
Mm-hmm.
However, in Russia, unemployment is regarded by our government as one of the fundamental threats to its legitimacy and, in general, to the existence of the regime itself. How here in Russia can we meet the demand of innovations with the necessity to protect the existing political system and the existing regime?
Someone else want to answer this question for me? No, this is a serious question. I'm not trying to joke about it. First of all, I said disruptive, not necessarily destructive. Disruptive meaning change. It changes the way things are done. And I think that what the Russian leadership realizes, and some part of the Russian elite realizes, is that this has to be done, or otherwise the industry that you have will not be competitive. The only way it can exist is to protect your market against outsiders. I mean, you can't, so what you need is an industry that absorbs innovation and probably spends more time training and retraining its workforce to use innovation and to be more flexible. I think there's no easy answer for this question other than having more labor mobility, more training, so that people can move to other places if necessary, and to not see innovation as meaning everything connected with the internet and computers, because there's a lot of industrial production that can be revived through innovation. And industrial production in agricultural products, in steel, in automobiles, in basic industry, which can become more productive and competitive within world and regional markets by incorporating innovation. But as long as the market, as long as you have owners of industry who only are living off of the past and are rent takers rather than developers, if you know what I mean, there's a big problem. And those industries become non-competitive. And in the end, it undermines the social stability that you're trying to protect. It's a hollowed out, rotten structure that collapses on itself at some point. And so I don't think there's any alternative in the modern world except to accept innovation, promote it, and not be left behind so that your industry rots out and disappears. Is that an answer to your question? Well, all right. Well, what did you expect to hear?
Modernizing our political system and fundamental of understanding that any political risk which any innovation entails is something that you have to be ready for. You don't have to be aware of losing your dominant position in the political system. That if once you lose the elections, it's not the end of your political career, and it's not the end of your political party, of course, the political force you are representing. In general, it means that without specific political conditions, as I see it personally, without a developed representative system in any country, well, it may sound a bit pathetic, even ideologically biased, but without democracy, you cannot have any working innovation system, whether the innovation system based on the design applied in the United States, or whether it's innovation system, for instance, of Germany. So without democracy, without this culture of accepting not only economic but also political risk, you cannot build a working innovative system at all.
In terms of the report, we decided deliberately not to discuss political questions. It's broader than our scope, and it would bring all kinds of other controversy, and it becomes then on our part an expression of opinions rather than an expression of expertise. So we tried in this report to focus on innovation, and I tried, I think at the beginning, to make a difference between modernization and innovation. And I certainly, I mean, I think what you're talking about is a modernization of the institutions of society, which I'm not either for or against in terms of what you said. I'm just saying it was not what we attempted to discuss, and it's something that needs to be decided here. I obviously live in a democracy, and I'm a proponent of democracy, and I've been a political activist and I'm part of political parties. But an uncomfortable fact of what our study shows is that a place like Taiwan, which had a military dictatorship pretty much until fairly recently, was able to not only modernize but create an innovation system. Singapore, very authoritarian place. So I don't think you can say that, I think democracy is a good. It's a social good, it's a moral good, it's a humanitarian good. It's not necessarily a prerequisite for innovation or modernization. Maybe it'll lead, modernization and innovation will lead to democracy. I don't know. But, you know, we could have a discussion about whether China is a democracy or what democracy means in terms of China. We certainly would have we certainly would be remiss if we didn't say China has modernized and developed. And so, you know, I think there's criteria are slightly different in different areas of the discussion. That's all I have to say about it. No.
But you are right.
Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned that those Russian specialists, like innovators, entrepreneurs, were already in the global market. Being a Russian, as you said, is a real marketing problem. So is it a one-way street? Do we only have to improve the image of our country, or the West also needs to improve probably its perception about Russia, which is some stereotypes? So what do we basically do about it?
Another not simple question. I have spent a lot of my adult life trying to explain Russia to Americans. You know, we fight against the influence of the mass media, which is less and less professional every minute, I would say, in terms of its resources it devotes, our media devotes to international relations and its stereotyping of Russia. But Russia itself, there have been very half-hearted efforts to do PR. I think Russia Today, for instance, has been a great advance, so it makes certain things available, but not much. Most of Americans that like business in Russia will say to me, well, Russia has done a terrible job of marketing itself. Because nobody will do it for Russia. And so the software companies that I know have faced this problem. They overcome it by bringing executives to their headquarters and bringing them to St. Petersburg or Moscow and showing them, well, this is what it's really like, not what you think it's like. They prepare white papers on critical questions like data security and information security and on the status of the law. They take on the negative perceptions at a very basic level and try to combat them. I think that a lot more of that needs to be done. You know, for those companies that don't want to be known as Russian companies, they're kind of taking the easy way out, but maybe at some point they're going to decide, well, that's not good enough. I don't know. I don't have a great answer for you, but, you know.
May I add something? When I was involved in governmental relationships as a deputy minister of telecommunications and informatics, I had a very interesting talk to my Australian counterpart, the Minister of Telecommunications of Australia, and he told me that nobody recognized Australia as a country with a strong IT and with the software production. So they had to move to buy some South Korean companies and to sell their products as South Korean IT. But they thought that it's okay, well, because money came to Australia. I don't know, is it correct way, but it's very capitalistic.
If I can
let me introduce Chris because he's had a lot of experience working here in Russia for the American Chamber of Commerce, so please chime in.
I've been involved in Russia for about 12 years, and having moved here in '98 and lived here and worked for the American Chamber of Commerce in Russia, it is a huge problem that you, even at this point, you think what Dan said in the report is true. It's worse than that. Anecdotally, just on the plane today, coming here from Boston to London, I read the New York Times front page article that was negative on Russia. I opened up my Economist magazine, who had a lengthy 2-page article.
Even Angelina Jolie is doing
yes, that's right.
something bad about Russia.
Of the perception. And the only way that it's going to change, we've been advocating when I was at the Chamber about demystifying Russia, or even more anecdotally, if I talk to 5 of my friends that I'm coming to Russia this week, it wasn't, wow, great, sounds exciting, and good opportunities. It was, why are you going to Russia? And so not much has changed in 12 years from my first visit to Moscow. But what's going to change is you in this room as future diplomats and future people that will go out and tell the story. There needs to be a telling of a story which is success. And there are many successes in Russia. We know that, you know that, and you see it. There is what Dan alluded to, which is the cultural change that needs to take place, the acceptance of risk-taking, of failure, of celebrating entrepreneurs. And I think that is the biggest thing that needs to change, is when you see an entrepreneur take a risk and become successful, how do you, as a young group, view that person? Do you celebrate that person? And if so, that resonates not just here locally and regionally and nationally, but then it spreads throughout the world. So it's really you and the success of businesses that are going to come out of you and your generation that's going to really make a difference globally, not just within America, because it resonates with other countries as well. But
yeah, and on the positive side, there are many people who don't pay attention to the mass media. I mean, we had a presentation about Russian innovation at the Cambridge Innovation Center, which is the largest incubator in the world. Is that right?
yeah,
They claim to be startup. Right. So someone brought up this problem of Russia's image, and there was a guy there who was some kind of a chemist. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. We all know Russian chemists are great. I love working with Russian chemists, and we work with them all the time whenever we need them. So in the software industry, people know, and there's some sayings about, like if you just need something done by rote, by routine, you send it to India. But if you need some creative solution, you send it to Russia. And people, there is underneath all this mass media nonsense about Angelina Jolie, or what's his name, the other idiot, the one that came here and married a waitress. What's his name?
Oh,
Mel Gibson, you know, and all this stuff. It was Mel Gibson. Underneath that, there are people who actually are really specialists in their field to understand the talent that is here in Russia and are using it. Microsoft hired half of the graduates of the mathematics faculty of Novosibirsk State University last year. I mean, they know the quality of people here. So there are positive parts, right? It's just the people who don't know anything, they have a reflex. They have a reflex negative image of Russia. They probably have negative images of other places too, you know, that they don't know anything about. So, but it's a mixed picture.
If Anne Chapman will become a model, and she is going to be, so probably it will be another input into this.
Well, you know, this was a very interesting thing. So President Medvedev comes to the U.S., and he and President Obama are very friendly, and all of a sudden, here comes this spy scandal. And you know, the press announces, oh my God, we found 10 spies and we're going to deport them immediately. They're all rounded up. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, this is it. My work in Russia is over. All the business people are going to say, they're all spies. You're a spy. Everybody's a spy. Nothing of the sort took place. It became a joke. It became a joke. And Americans looked at it, and on talk radio, they were joking about this. Oh, yeah, these spies, they were used car dealers. What the hell could they find? You know, whatever they needed, they could find on the internet. And so instead of it ruining everything, I think it was, the atmosphere was different. That's all I can say. The atmosphere was different. It wasn't like, oh my God, the Russians again. It was, oh, these bumbling idiots, you know, who could have sent them there, and they don't threaten us at all. You know, so.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you.